FIU family and friends? This is Tomas Alcala with FIU in Washington, D.C., and I'm here to present a mini rendition of Panthers on the Presidency, which is an interview series where we speak with FIU alumni and friends of the university who are in the political arena and ask them questions about the current presidential election. This week, we were fortunate enough to have Gustavo Arnavat stop by our FIU offices here in Washington, D.C. Gustavo is an Obama administration appointee and the head of U.S. at the Inter-American Development Bank, and he is now also a current senior advisor at the Center for Strategic and International Studies. Gustavo, thank you for joining me today.
Thank you, Thomas. Pleasure to be here.
So, my first question, since your expertise is in Latin America, I'm curious, what are the both of the candidates' stances on Latin America and U.S. relations, and what will the potential impact of those stances have on our relation in the future?
It's a great question. Latin America has featured prominently in the election of late, in part because, as you know, Donald Trump has made one of the major pillars of his campaign has been the building the wall with Mexico, and announcing various financing alternatives for how to get that wall paid for. That's created a lot of tension, clearly, between the United States and Mexico. We also know that Trump has spoken a little bit about Cuba and U.S. relations with Cuba. He was initially in favor of the president's announcement in favor of engagement with that country. A few months after that announcement was made in December 2014, but recently has talked about how if he's elected president, he will roll back the executive orders. Clinton, on the other hand, has spoken about, with respect to Cuba, has spoken about how she would continue with the president's vision of engagement. Obviously, it depends on how Cuba responds to various initiatives on the part of the United States, right, for further diplomatic and commercial relations with the United States, with Cuba. But in general, she will continue with what the president has been trying to do. More generally, Secretary Clinton has spoken about the importance of engaging commercially, diplomatically, etc., with the entire world, including Latin America, and about how important it is in the case of Latin America, given that we have 600 million plus people who live in the Americas, south of Texas, and how important it is to have a good commercial relationship with them.
So, heading back on the domestic front, in this election we've seen an ever-growing populism movement, and it's been on both sides of the spectrum. It's been with the Bernie Sanders crowd and also with the Donald Trump crowd. And I'm wondering, in your perspective, why do you think that is exactly?
So I think the root of this has to do with economics and the perception that the country is not growing economically as quickly as most Americans would want. There's no question that, from my perspective, I think President Obama did a phenomenal job rescuing us from what would have been the second biggest depression in the history of the United States. But nevertheless, and for a lot of different reasons, we have not been growing at 3-4%, which would cause us to have a much more robust economy, right, with lots more people employed and employed in more meaningful ways than they are now. So I think that's created a lot of insecurity on the part of many Americans, and it happens not just in the United States but anywhere else. Immigrants are often blamed for the lack of jobs because there's a perception that immigrants are taking away jobs. That's really not the case. A lot of the jobs that are being performed by immigrants, particularly from Latin America, are not the kinds of jobs that many Americans would want. So I think if we were to find a solution so we can have a more robust economy, I think that issue goes away. But beyond that, I think there's also several tens of millions of people in the United States who are culturally they're feeling alienated in some ways because of the demographic change that are taking place. They're concerned that from their perspective that the country is changing too quickly, and that they will somehow lose their own identity, if that makes any sense.
Right.
Those of us, in my case, my family came from Cuba. We went to Miami, and I think that if you look at Miami, for example, I think it's a city that has grown tremendously and has benefited greatly from the infusion and the influx, rather, of immigrants from not just from Cuba, from Nicaragua, and Venezuela, and Colombia, and a number of other countries that have given so much life and energy to a place like Miami.
Well, Gustavo, it's always a pleasure speaking with you. Thank you for joining me today. Gustavo is a proud Panther parent, and we are certainly proud to have him as part of our FIU family. So thanks again for joining me today on Panthers on the Presidency.
Thank you, Thomas.